Today, it is August 13th, 2018, and we're going to be doing a legacy video of Dr. Arnold Nerenberg, my father, and I'm Natasha Nerenberg, and this is for you guys, the Nerenberg lineage. And to give you some background, this is me, Natasha, this is Justice, Janara, Laylee, Shiraz, Sammy, Potham, and this is about the late 90s. And without any further ado, I'd like to introduce the man of the hour, my dad, our dad, Dad. Doesn't get much better than that.
That was good. That was good, sweetheart. So just go ahead and ask your questions and we'll proceed from there.
Okay, so to just get some context, how would you describe your personality up until the age of like 13? So you in your youth.
Well, in my youth, I grew up I was born in the Bronx, and I grew up in Brooklyn. And my close friend was Daniel Conliffe. He was next door. He was black. He might have known he was black because his parents might have told him, but I didn't know he was black. So Daniel would be in my apartment, I'd be in his apartment. My parents never told me he was black. And back then we had what was called ranking each other out. You would sit down maybe on a bed or whatever. You sit down and you insult each other. And you insult each other's mothers, insult each other's families. So in any way you could. It was just entertainment. It was called ranking each other out. So one day we're on our way to PS12. And it was myself, Daniel. I was about 8. And then this guy, Richie. And then Richie made a derogatory comment about Daniel's race, his color, and I went, oh yeah. And I made fun of his race or his color. I mean, I didn't know it was a race, I just knew it was a color, and I made the same fun of him. Well, later that evening, Mrs. Conliffe, his mother, said to me, did you say this to Daniel? I said, yeah. He says, well, don't ever do that again. I said, okay, Mrs. Daniel, I never did. Now, it wasn't natural. I knew from there, I look back, I said, it's not natural to notice race. I mean, I know I could whoop Daniel in a fight. That was natural for boys to know. But color was not. So I had to tell you because it wasn't a relevant dimension. And so we grew up together. And back then, in terms of gangs, I was in a gang at 5. It wasn't based on race, it was based on territory. So we were in the projects, we were white, black, and Puerto Rican. And so, when the gang composed of these different mixtures at that time. The top fighters were considered Puerto Ricans, they were called the knife people. Then the blacks and the whites were the bottom, and of course being Jews, we were the bottom of the bottom. We weren't a very warlike group, we were kind of wimpy in this country. We were just, the Israeli Jew is a warrior. We were kind of wimpy and also, you know, we were studious. Yeah, well,
to interject, I think we should have some context of like the year, social context, and the significance of like you saying I didn't see color. So this is like
well, I was born in 41, and the Navy shipyard was not far away. My father worked in those years in the Navy shipyard. He was a sheet metal worker. Your grandfather was a sheet metal worker. And it was during World War II, so that took care of his service to the military. He was a sheet metal cutter worker. So you're looking at from about 43. I was about 2 years old when we lived there. From 43 to probably 49, to 1949, around there. And back then, people didn't have 357s and Uzis and shotguns. I mean, they were homemade guns, what people call zip guns, and the switchblade knives. And that's what happened. One time I remember I got in a fight with this kid, James, and we were throwing rocks at each other. And he threw a rock up. And I ran and hid under a bench to make sure the rock wouldn't hit me. Well, you know, that bench has little slats in there where you're sitting. And doggone if that thing didn't go between the slats and hit me in the head, that rock. I was kind of dizzy after it hit me, and it didn't knock me out, but it hit me in the head. And it was a funny thing, because it went right between the slats and the bench. It hit me. And it's right where I ran to duck the thing. So later on, James got this gang to chase me. They were chasing me all over the place. And I did manage to escape. So now I would say then Gerald Greenberg moved in. He was a Jewish guy, and he lived a few projects over. And so we became friends. I had one Jewish friend, and then I had Daniel, my black friend. Those are the two main friends that I grew up with. In fact, when I moved away to Long Island, I tried to track down Daniel and spoke to him on the phone once. And I still to this day would like to know where Daniel lives. He was my first friend. And it was a good friend. It was a good friend. And Gerald, I stayed in touch with until we went to college and graduate school. And Gerald became very well known in his field in physical education and would be on sabbaticals and write textbooks. And I remember in kindergarten, we would throw some baskets. We were first exposed to basketball, and he was good then, and he became an athlete. And in college, he was playing basketball, and he loved it. He loved hearing the crowd screaming and everything. He did that, and then eventually got his Ph.D. in physical education.
So center back, how would you describe your personality, though? These are experiences.
Well, you know, I would say my personality...
Up until about 13.
Was... You have to remember, it was the 40s and the 50s were not a time of expressing your feelings and your thoughts. Nobody was. Mm-hmm. Nobody did. So everything was around what we're going to be doing. Now, as we got into the late 50s, well, maybe by the time I was 11 or 12, I was about 11 or 12 years old when we really had an intellectual conversation, and we went to Rockaway Beach. We'd be there for the summer. We rent a room there, whatever. And my father would be there, Uncle Harry, Cousin Jackie, and Cousin Walter, Phyllis. So it'd be in the beach area there. And we used to be on the boardwalk at night. And so some of Jackie's friends would be up there, and we were discussing, we had an intellectual conversation about what would happen in the future, a lot of helicopters and planes, and how the sky would be crowded with aircraft. And I remember loving this kind of intellectual conversation. And that's really whetted my appetite for intellectual conversation. So Jackie and I would then be having those after that, and my cousin Sammy and I also would. So we would be discussing philosophy, particularly objectivism, the Ayn Rand writings. We would discuss Torah and whatever. But my personality, I would have to say, was, I would say a couple of things. One, I was not a popular kid. I wasn't especially likable. I was not a magnet. It wasn't like, oh, people want to be with Arnie. That would be a great thing. I mean, Jackie and I were very close. Sammy and I were very close. But it was, I didn't even understand the concept of honor or respect. There was no such thing as respect. I mean, your thing was to insult people and be tough and be able to fight. And then by the time I was in the 8th grade, being a good student became important. Jackie was a good student, and it got me excited about studying when I was in the 8th grade. So up to that point, though, it was all about being tough. I didn't even understand respect. We were all insulting each other, which was not, once I left New York, it created problems. And we were loud, but it was not the way of the world. It was the way of the projects, and maybe in other poor areas as well. And we were poor people in that area. Since
you touched upon this idea of being tough and fight, do you mind recounting the experience where you skipped out on a fight and how that impacted you?
Well, I'll tell you one fight. I mean, when I was younger, I would get in different fights. White guys, black guys, Puerto Ricans. In fact, I have a scar from 6 years old when I fell in glass, and it was pretty bad. I still have the scar on my left knee. Then when I was 14, living in the suburbs, my friend Richie Wolfman, there was Tony Ficara and Barry Tartarsky. So they started insulting Richard. They thought he was just looking at them in a creepy way, and they started picking on him, insulting, saying things to him. And so I went up there and kind of defended him and said some insulting words to the other guys. Meant in the old New York way, was that meant as a challenge, because I knew Tony and Barry and whatnot. And so Barry then came at me and took a swing at me, and then Barry came at me. I called for my friend Rod. Nobody came. I ran. Richard ran. And I was traumatized by it. The running was traumatic. The running, I felt cowardly about it. And I dealt with it by later inviting Barry to come to my home, Tony to come to my home, and I planned on attacking them. They never took me up on my invitations. But after that helped form my personality and caused me to go ultimately into severe depression when I was about 20. And that depression was part of the reason I became a psychologist. So I wanted to never go into that kind of depression. I wanted to help other people not go into it. And so I would say, and then after that, I would stand up to people in all kinds of situations or protect people in situations because I couldn't bear to be a coward again. Yeah.
And we have a question from Sammy, and it is, what 3 pieces of advice would you give to your 13-year-old self?
To my 13-year-old self? That's a good question, Sammy. What advice would I give to myself and my 13-year-old self? I'd say, for one thing, put honor before all else, and honor as defined by what I call the 4 commandments of honor. God, your wish is my only wish. I wish you well. I take full responsibility for co-creating my reality and my problems, and I'm grateful for the power I gain from hardship. And apply this question in all situations. What is the most honorable thing for me to think, say, and do in this situation? So I would have said, put honor above all else and understand honor. And certainly part of that is fairness and respect. And most people will sell their honor for survival, for money, sex, pride, comfort and safety, happiness. Mm-hmm. So I would say to my 13-year-old self, just seek honor. Don't even seek happiness. Just seek honor, and happiness and all things will be added unto you, I would say to myself. Say it in a way that a 13-year-old can hear it. I probably have said it to myself a few different ways. And that's advice I would pass to anybody, young or old. I mean, at 77, I like to help younger people come into that understanding at a younger age.
Something that you seem to really identify throughout your life is, studying and the yearning for knowledge. Would you mind touching upon, your mid-20s, late 20s, and your experiences maybe at Columbia and your endeavors to get your Ph.D.?
Well, as a Jew, you look at Torah, you could look at Torah and Torah knowledge as sacred. So to a Jew, you want knowledge, not just to make a living or to show off with your knowledge, but it was sacred. So when I studied at Columbia University or in college, it was a sacred endeavor. I didn't realize that much of that knowledge in a way was not sacred. I just naively regarded it all as sacred, just unconsciously acting out the idea that knowledge was sacred, which is part of my Jewish heritage. And what separates also a Jew from others, all people value answers, but a Jew values the questions. So I'd be very questioning. In fact, in graduate school at Columbia, I'd be asking questions, and nobody else would. It's not considered, you don't want to show your ignorance. People wouldn't do that, but I didn't care as a Jew. I would just be asking questions. We ask questions. So we value questions as well as the answers. So for me, it was a sacred quest, absolutely sacred quest. And matter of fact, I developed an approach where after I finished my course and gave back to the professors what he needed to hear so I could get my grade, I would say, what are the 3 most important concepts for me to remember in 10 years from now? And I have about 3 or 4 sheets of paper that summarize the 3 or 4 most important concepts in each course. And I had a big 10-foot by 10-foot chart on the wall with lines. I paid somebody 75 cents an hour to draw lines on it, and I would outline all areas of knowledge in psychology. When I went to the University of Texas after there, I took that with me, had it up. But I was so tired of that kind of intellectual knowledge that I just gave it to my mentor, Stephen Binman, Dr. Binman, and he eventually, the books and that, he eventually that disappeared from his possession. But I have a photo of that, of all that whole area of knowledge because I regard it as really sacred. So and that idea of asking what are the most important things, 3 most important things I want to remember in 10 years from now. And the advice I was given when I was a freshman in college was, he said, when a class ends, don't just get up and leave the room. He said, take about 30 seconds or a minute and ask yourself, what are 2 or 3 of the main points covered? because that's what you'll remember later, and that gives you the skeleton then to go when you get to details. And if you can't come up with the 2 or 3 main concepts, sit there and look at your notes before you leave, because that's what's going to stay with you for a longer time. So that'd be one thing in terms of study method. The other aspect in terms of study is what I call program learning. I'll give you a fact that I learned 50 years ago. Acetylcholine is a neurohuman in the central nervous system. So I would make a chord and it would go blank is a neurohuman in the central nervous system. On the other side of the chord I would write acetylcholine. Then I go acetylcholine is a blank in the central nervous system. On the other side of the chord I put as a neurohumor. And the third would be acetylcholine is a neurohumor in the blank nervous system. On the other side of the chord it would say central nervous system. So you go through the chords until you can go through them once without making one mistake. So that way when you sit down for an exam, you not only know your material, but just as important is you know your material, because you can go through all those cards and not make one mistake. And that knowledge will really stay with you a long time. And not only will you, in a multiple choice question, be able to recognize the answer, if you have to write an essay, it's so fluidly integrated into your whole way of thinking, you can do that. The other thing I would do is, before you go to sleep at night, take just a few minutes to review what you learned that day, and when you wake up in the morning, review it again. Just take a few minutes to review by recall. The recall is very important. Yeah.
I just kind of want to solidify this point that you have a very expansive knowledge, and I guess it all traces back that you did this for so long. I mean, you could really talk about any topic.
Well, I like to say my ignorance knoweth no bounds. If it has to do with human nature, health and fitness and strength, yes. Other things I could study them and put together a pretty good understanding, give a talk and present that, because I have enough foundation to do whatever. That to do with, like any aspect of human nature, whether it's creativity, anxiety, self-development, self-actualization, I could talk on it. And I can only prepare for a couple of minutes, so it looks like I'm prepared for a few minutes, but actually, when people see me just put something together at the spur of the moment, and I write a little outline real quickly, they say, gee, you just did that in a couple of minutes. I say, nah, I prepared for 77 years. My whole life was preparation for this presentation.
So then the other question I ask is, how do you identify with your Jewish heritage in addition to the quest of knowledge? And I'd also like you to kind of trace the evolution of that, how it maybe started when you were younger, because I know you went to some sort of rabbinical camp, and then now...
Well, I went to that Jewish camp, Camp Arguda. I always felt this deep yearning to be in communion with God. It was just either inborn, natural, or part of being Jewish. And I had tremendous thirst. I remember I was studying Torah at my Aunt Herman's house, and he said, look, Torah book, and it was such a great thing to be, studying these things. And, but as a kid, I somehow had the idea if you didn't pray in Hebrew, God wouldn't listen. I mean, it was like English. Even if you said it in German, any foreign language, nobody ever told me this, but if it was in English, God wasn't going to respond. You had to be able to do it in Hebrew at best, or any language, but not English by native tongue. It was a very bizarre thought, but I guess maybe Catholics maybe had it. If it wasn't in Latin, it wasn't, God wasn't going to respond. Certainly for me, it wasn't going to God, it was a question of whether they'd respond if it wasn't in Hebrew. So I would say my psyche is very Jewish. We're descendants of, you're a descendant of the Shloh HaKadosh, Isaiah Horowitz, who was one of the most famous of all rabbis, right up there with Maimonides. He was in Poland in 1550, and he wrote Generations of Adam, integrating Kabbalah and Torah. It's mind-blowing. I didn't know how a human being integrates that knowledge, and what he expressed was shockingly powerful. It was like, I couldn't even understand. It was hard to even follow a lot of it. But it was, so elevated spiritually, and it seemed like it all made sense. I did read the book and was amazed by it. I just couldn't understand. I couldn't believe it. Anybody could write that book. So, but I would say my Jewish way. I remember saying to Dr. Abraham, who was an Egyptian, I said, "Well, did the Arabs not like us in Israel, because that area, because we tend to be obnoxious?" He said, "No." He said, "Jews are not obnoxious. Eastern Europeans are. A lot of Jews are Ashkenazi, Eastern European, and we're abrasive to other people."
Mm-hmm. So another question from Sammy is, was there a pivotal moment in life where if you had made a different choice, your life would be totally different?
Pivotal moment. pivotal moment. Yeah, probably when Tony took that swing at me, if I had attacked him, because it took me about 50 years to work that out, because I felt deeply ashamed and humiliated by it. I probably, if I had attacked him, probably wouldn't have gone through that depression. You know, maybe I wouldn't have become a world champion powerlifter. It was all working through those adolescent issues. Maybe I never would have gotten a motorcycle. So I'm not saying I would have had a better life. I certainly would have had better quality life during those years, but there was certainly good that came out of it. I like to say, enshrined within your deepest struggles, the seed of your nobility, your destiny, your legacy, and your honor. So I could see that good came of it, and it's the best true story about my worst problem was that it led to me becoming a psychologist, a world champion powerlifter, but did compromise the quality of my life having that. So, yeah, if I had attacked them, or attacked them both and just taken whatever beating. So I would say probably good advice to a young man, 12, 13, 14, is never let anybody push you around. Doesn't matter if they knock you out or what happens, you just fight until they're out. You just go out at full blast. That might have been good advice for me in terms of saving me a lot of suffering. For 50 years, I couldn't even talk about it. I was so embarrassed by it, ashamed. But at the same time, it helped form who I am. And a lot of good came out of that tremendous experience, negative experience, really.
So you're talking about some ideas of insecurity, and, you know, insecurities come up, you know, through adolescence. How would you advise a young kid to navigate, you know, self-esteem or self-confidence issues?
There's only one basis for self-esteem and self-respect, only one. You could try to get really buffed up, but then if you get in an accident or you get sick or you get weak, you lose it. You could try to become rich, but then if you lose your money, whatever. You could get the prettiest girl around and people go, wow, you got this girlfriend, but she leaves you, or she gets in an accident and she's not so pretty, you lose it. You want to build your self-esteem on what matters. And what matters is your honor. If you become a disciple of honor, you're a man of honor, a woman of honor, that's a really good foundation for true self-esteem, real self-respect. Is to, because in the end, all you're going to have is your honor. Your looks, you eventually live long enough, you're not going to have it. And your strength, you know, eventually you're probably not going to have it. And your money, you might have. You know, but your honor, nobody can take from you. Only you can give that up. That's the real foundation, I would tell people, for true self-respect, true self-esteem.
So, kind of moving forward a bit in terms of fatherhood, what was that like from the beginning of it all, when you first had, say, Shiraz, and then how that differs when you had your last kid, which is me,
there was
Natasha.
A pregnancy with Vicky, was a miscarriage. So that child was on the other side, and I say prayers for that child. And Maheen and I had one miscarriage, and that child, so I pray for two of my unborn children, two souls that are on the other side. I didn't stop praying for them until the last year. I didn't even think about I should pray for them, but I said, well, you know, they're souls. They're here. They're just didn't come into the physical world. I would say as soon as Shiraz was born and I was a father, I immediately felt more mature. I mean, instantly, like that.
Did you have that leading up to her birth?
I don't know if I did.
She was pregnant?
I just remember when she was born, she was crying, and then we looked in each other's eyes. She stopped crying, gave her back to the doctor. She started crying again. But immediately, I used to feel like a kid myself, and I stopped feeling like a kid. I also was very playful up to that point. I became less playful. I became more of a grown-up or whatever. So it was a little bit of loss. My childhood seemed to have ended around then. And I became, more of a responsible citizen, more responsible individual when Shiraz was born. Then that just added when the other kids were born. But there was an immediate change in my identity, and my experience of myself was quite immediate for me.
Mm. And how did the feeling of being a father change from, say, your first one, so Shiraz, to me?
Well, your first one, you're obsessed about everything, and I used to be teaching her about 2 years old. She knew, she could say who wrote the Quran, who wrote the Bible, you know, who did the New Testament, the Old Testament, who wrote the Bhagavad Gita, who was the author of Bhagavad Gita, who were the different prophets. She would shock people. I'd say, you know, who wrote the Quran? She'd say Muhammad. People go, what? They couldn't believe she was 2 years old. So I would get her tutors at 2, 3 years old, and you know, just constantly be teaching her things. So I put a lot of energy into her. And then with each one, I was just more relaxed about everything. It was more obsessive. I think, and that's a common trend where you put a lot into your first, and you just get more relaxed after that. You know, you love all your children the same, but you just get more and more relaxed with each one. So I would say that happened. And then Shirazi was encouraged then to be a mother to Justice, and then to Janara and Sammy. And so he's putting that figure. Because I always thought it was a good idea for the older to take care of the younger. That's a very common structure in many societies, but I guess Americans don't do that much, so it was a little odd. It's been said that she lost her childhood by doing that. I always thought it was a really good thing to do. Mm. Yeah.
In terms of parenting style, how would you describe your parenting style, just generally speaking? And then would you do anything differently on how you raised your kids?
When I was married to Vicky, Vicky was not a disciplinarian. She wasn't that strict with the kids, and I was the punisher. She'd say, well, when your dad gets home, he's going to punish you for this, whatever. And so she was. So I was more the disciplinarian, and I perceived more as mean as a result. So we had a very different parenting style, and I think Shiraz and Justice and certainly Janara and maybe Sammy really disliked me for it. And I thought, well, I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to give everything I can to my children, spiritually, emotionally, financially, in any way I can. That was my experience of it. So I did that. But also, I put more energy in spiritually, particularly in my first two, and then got divorced when Janara and Sammy were, 3 or 4 or 4 or 5. But I used to take Justice and Shiraz to Bosch and really be teaching the Baha'i writings. I was very active. Shiraz remembers when I used to get in the crib with Justice and chant prayers with him, and to tell stories and record them. We have some books from the stories. I used to record the stories I'd be telling Shirazi, and then I did that with Padam. I told him stories and recorded them, but I didn't do that with you. I didn't do that with Layli. I just became just not putting as much energy in and kind of really structuring and pushing myself to do these things.
Do you regret that at all with Layli?
No, I don't regret it. I don't regret it. Now, with Maheen, we have a similar parenting style. We believe in that the child should respect the parent. So she's a disciplinarian as well as being nurturing. So I didn't have to be mean with you and Janara or strict with you and Janara and Padam, because Maheen is very strict herself, but also extremely nurturing, so she had that balance. And so I wasn't resented by you and Janara and you and Layli and Padam. I wasn't resented for being this mean father coming home punishing and whatnot. But probably the one thing I feel was a mistake is I used to punish by taking things away, and so with Shiraz and I think with Justice and what I do with Padam, took away one of their favorite figures when they went to punish them over doing something, and that was not a good idea. I think that was a mistake to punish taking those away. I would have changed that, but otherwise, I wasn't somebody that was brutal in punishment or whatever, hitting and slapping or whatever. I was not, a brutal punisher. It was through taking things away and giving things to reward.
So something that you've underscored throughout our experience, our dynamic as father and daughter, is one-on-one time.
I always had one-on-one time. Now that's another thing. When Shiraz was young, I would take her away for the weekend. We'd go to Kiamaka or we'd go to Bermuda. With Justice, we would take him for weekend trips. And then I didn't take Sammy for a trip until she was about 16, took her to Bermuda. And then when Janara was about, 18 or 20, I took her to Hawaii. So I did those but not as many trips as I did my first two. Then you and I have gone all over the place. We've gone to New York a couple of times. We've gone to Hawaii. We've gone to Boston. We've taken trips. And Laylee and I have gone to Berkeley. We went up to the Bay Area a couple of times, although we've talked about taking her maybe to Bermuda sometime, whatever, just that. And then Potham and I would stay at a hotel a few times. Maybe one in, remember we did it up in Santa Monica, and we went to Palm Springs together. So I kept up. The one-on-one was always very important.
Why was it so important?
Well, to really be able to hear the reality of each of my children, and to be able to address that reality and pay attention in a way that I felt was productive. I felt the one-on-one was important. The group thing, that can get lost because the kids start arguing and fighting, or they're talking to each other. You really don't get a chance to give the guidance, because I've always felt the most important job I had was to give guidance, not to entertain you, but to guide you and prepare you for life. And I felt that was best served one-on-one. Now, I used to make sure I got 90 minutes alone with Shirazi and Justice. I probably put the most time into my parenting with Shirazi and Justice. And then I wasn't with when they were growing up. But even when Vicky and I divorced, I would see all the kids often and talk to them off my phone. And to this day, Lady and I go out Saturdays. You and I go out, regularly, take a whole day. And of course, I believe in one-on-one time with Mahim, my beloved wife. I mean, we go out every Sunday. We go to a movie. We go to a restaurant. And, I'm just thrilled to have that one-on-one time with each of you. Yeah. Now, I did find that I came to understand as I got older that the most important relationship is not your relationship to your children. The most important relationship is to your wife. And then to the extent that's strong, that gives hope and a paradigm for the children. And also the children, each of you have your own life. So I've said to each of you, I said, when you're married, I sat down with some of you, with your spouse and yourself, and said, I want you to choose your spouse over me. If it comes to choosing between us, you choose that person over me, because your life is tied to your husband or tied to your wife, not as much to me. And I do the same. My wife, Maheen, comes before my children. My life is tied to her. Of course, that could happen as the children get older. When the children are younger, you give a very high priority to the kids. But as they get older, the priority has to be the spouse, and I advise you to be that way. Again, that's when the children are 4, 5, 6 years old and they're totally dependent on you. You've got to really be more attentive in that way. Yeah. These are good questions.
Since you brought up Mom, just curious how you would describe that love, because I've found it such a joy to witness your guys' marriage. Sure, you guys have had your hard times, but I think.
Well, tell me the joy that you've had, that you've seen in our marriage.
I mean, just the way you guys talk to each other. Yes, it's really loving, but when you guys are mean to each other, you could come around and still see the greatness in one another, and just remind yourselves of that. And that's unusual.
Yeah.
That's unusual, because I know some things can be tough at times. And to be specific, like, you yourself will be to Mom like, oh, you're so cute. And you can just focus on the good aspects of her. Yeah.
Well, you get to a point where Mom is upset. I go, well, that's Maheen. That's my beloved. And to me, it's adorable. That's her. Well, she's upset with me. Sometimes it gets to me, that's for sure. No doubt about it. And usually I can just work that out and find what's the most honorable way for me to think, say, and do in the situation. That'll usually take care of it. Once in a while, I just got to talk to her and say, I need to talk to you about this, what happened. Yeah.
But in addition to that, I've enjoyed just like seeing your guys' sense of humor. You guys are always laughing together.
We have a lot of good laughs. Your mom's a good laugher. We have the same sense of humor, the same values. Now, my parents, Papa and Nana, used to get in horrific fights. I mean, it would blow up. It would last 10 minutes, and then they'd be laughing. So I grew up around that. I wasn't around these long, drawn-out things and silent treatments and everything else. They would blow up pretty badly, and then they'd be laughing.
So what would you say about the place of humor in marriage?
Well, it helps if you have a similar sense of humor. I will say that. It's been amazing that how similar Mommy and I are. I mean, here she is, Muslim girl from Iran, Jewish boy from Brooklyn, American, And the similarities are just astounding. As a matter of fact, Menage, our oldest sister, she said he looks like one of us. Like that family. I mean, what that's about, that's my Beshert, my destiny, to be with mommy. It's just, how does that happen? We're from different parts of the world, different religious backgrounds, end up with the same values in terms of parenting and humor and about life and what matters. And being fiercely loyal people. My father, I learned loyalty from my father, but he was insanely loyal, as I am, and your mother is. Then you find other people are not that way. It's hard to find that kind of loyalty. But my father had that. Her father and her parents, and Maheen is very loyal, and I am. So that was amazing, And there's no doubt that my father and mother would have gotten along well with her father, and our mothers did, even though they didn't speak the same language. Nana and Mama Bezork got along really well, even though they didn't speak the same language. So that's a good sign. So
it's really a marriage of two families.
Ideally, it's a marriage of two families.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I didn't get to see John Gear much, but the little we talked, but John Shaw has been a real beautiful brother. Manage and Mariam, my two sisters. I mean, it's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's been just a great situation.
So in terms of love advice, what advice would you give to someone navigating the dating scene?
Well,
keep in mind there's dating apps rampant around.
Yeah, I mean, certainly you want to feel attracted, and that's a good thing. You have to know that you can like somebody's looks. You can think they're really good looking. You can like their personality. You can like their philosophy. That's all good. So you can be very attracted to that person. But it doesn't mean they have good character. Character is, do they have honor? Do they keep their word? Are they loyal, reliable? They have values of service to community and to God and to family. That takes time to know the person's character. And in terms of long-term relationship or in terms of marriage, character is more important even than the looks and then the personality and the philosophy. Although they're all super important, but character is the most important, and whether we're a person of honor. And if you don't know that, you can meet somebody with a great philosophy, believes in God fiercely or says they do, very attractive human being look-wise, and be a con man if they just integrated that masculine and feminine principle without that noble character, without being honorable. They can just manipulate people. So you really need to know something about their character. One way to have some idea of who a man is, you meet his father. One idea to find out something about who a woman is, you meet her mother. It gives you an idea. It's not a foolproof system, but it gives you an idea.
So in what ways do you think you are an honorable person?
Well, I was not. Certainly in my life, I've been not a totally honorable person. I am now. I would say, after I had my felony, I had developed these power thoughts, and then I became, with my felony, the last thing I said to the Judge Snyder 4.5 years ago before she sentenced me for billing fraud and mail fraud was, I have not always lived with honor, but I will die with honor. And some people say she had tears in her eyes, and I honestly didn't see any tears. But she said, I totally believe Dr. Nerenberg's sincerity, but due to the seriousness of the crime, 5 years of probation, $172,000 restitution, which I've totally paid off, and 1 year home detention where I had an ankle bracelet for a year. And I got off probation early, over a year ago, after serving 3 years. So I would say, we've had two backgrounds in our family. One is my mother's side were descendants of the Shloch HaKadosh, Isaiah Horowitz, holy men, and my grandfather, Arnold Singer, Orthodox rabbi and a great man. On my father's side were businessmen. My grandfather, Frank, my father's father, was a bootlegger, basically an outlaw. And so I was integrating both the outlaw and the holy man. And so I lived out the outlaw thing, became a felon as a criminal, and became a holy man. I changed some of those power thoughts into 4 commandments of honor and totally live an honorable life in terms of thought, word, and action, I may get some initial negative reactions or dishonorable thoughts, but or if I step across that line, I immediately correct it within minutes. And I teach this to my patients, and I believe I emanate that now. But I went through a lot of lack of honor, and I was never a really terrible person. I was always a decent kind of guy, but I became truly a disciple of honor. You know, the pledge of honor, which I give to others, I internalize myself. As a disciple of honor, I pledge myself all the days of my life to the 4 commandments of honor, and I'll teach them to those I love. I'll repeat them every morning, afternoon, and evening, and I'll listen to myself recite them. I mean, and I bring my children into it, and grandchildren. I like to be disciples of honor and hope to leave a legacy of honor. But like I said, I've not always lived with honor, but I will die with honor.
Mm. And just to kind of close out, and this might be a first of maybe 2 or more, what is a message you'd like to give your grandkids and great-grandkids and so forth?
Well, the message I want to give my kids and my grandkids, and I've been saying, it's kind of a theme, never put anything before your honor. Honor is defined by the 4 commandments of honor. Nothing is worth it. Nothing. It's a bad trade. Don't be stupid. Don't put money or sex or pride or what you call happiness. In fact, don't even seek happiness. Forget about happiness. Seek honor, and true happiness will be given to you. It comes with it. Things that you think make you happy, if I can get this toy or this house or this car, and you might really feel happy for a while until it gets scratched or your house is damaged in an earthquake or a pipe breaks or the septic tank overflows. But when you put honor, you become a disciple of honor, a man of honor, a woman of honor, true happiness will come to you. So that's what I would say to you. Don't seek happiness, seek honor. Honor is achievable, and true happiness will come with it. That's my biggest message to you. Because if you ask almost anybody, what do you want out of life? They say, well, money matters, but I just want to be happy. What do you want for your kids? I just want them to be happy. What makes them happy? You want to marry this guy, it makes you happy, marry him. You want to divorce him, makes you happy, divorce him. Now, whatever makes you happy, not that people even know it makes them happy. They really should be saying, son or my daughter, do what's honorable. What is the most honorable thing for you to do? It's a very different way of life. And then true happiness comes with that. That's my biggest advice to you.
And on that note, we'll just finish.
Why don't you step up here and just say whatever you want to say. I love you. It was beautiful having this time with you.
Well, to kind of close out, I want to give some of my words on my dad. He's a man that I'm very keen on. I'd say he's my best friend. And if you don't have the fortunate opportunity of meeting him, I really wanted to provide this video. Because when I listened to the video of my grandfather, so your great-grandfather, I got very emotional. And the reason behind that was because I knew what an impact my grandfather had on my father. And likewise, I would say that our dad has had such an impact on everybody on the family, some more than others. But specifically for me, I'd like to say that my dad, our dad, has been just there. You know, he's really been there for us emotionally, and it's always felt like a balanced relationship. And you're not always going to find that in relationships you seek, whether that be friendships, significant others, whatever. But you know, we call each other. When I was up in undergrad experience at UC Berkeley, at least twice a day, and that's some things you'll just never forget. And so what I kind of want you to take from this is to really appreciate your parents, because they care about you. I mean, everything else kind of comes but goes. And as cliche as it sounds, but family's really there. But there's something very special about your parents, even more than your siblings, because they watch you grow up. They have the best intentions for you. They'll have an unconditional love for you that is indescribable. And for that reason, I hope that you enjoyed this video as much as I had observing it. Thank you.
The sea of destiny is in your deepest struggle. God's will and mine be one, and I wish you well. You are co-creator, respectfully real. There's a way in the valley that turns weakness to steel. We're known through all eternity. From strife we gain power, clothed in grace and love, disciples of honor. All the days of our lives refuse the way of shame. We wish nobody harm, have no one to blame. Your high calling will be done, and your eyes now glow. In darkness crave the good, like waters from the desert flow. I pledge my love all the days of my life. I pledge my soul to all that is good. I pledge my heart to my brothers and sisters who I join in the light, leave a legacy of honor. We're known through all eternity. From strife we gain power, clothed in grace and love, disciples of honor. All the days of our lives refuse the way of shame. We wish nobody harm, have no one to blame. Your high calling will be done, and pure eyes now glow. In darkness crave the good, like waters from the desert flow.